Those of you who've seen my website or any of my branding might have seen that it said artist and printmaker under my name. And you might be wondering, where's the printmaking? I've done lots of painting on this channel, but it's been quite a while since I've done any printmaking. Now, I've been doing some in the background, but I really feel like over the last couple of years, I've sort of lost my printmaking mojo. So I'm going to try and get it back. And one of the ways that I'm doing that is by documenting what I'm doing. So I'm making some videos about the prints that I'm making, and I'm going to share them here with you on this channel. These are not intended to be tutorials. They're just an insight into my process. But if you do have any questions about what I'm doing or why, then I will try and answer them. And I'm starting by showing you the process for making some screen prints. I need to start by drawing on something transparent. Tracing paper is perfect. So I'm cutting them up into smallish sheets so they're sort of manageable, and then I'll be able to get drawing and making marks on them. I'm also cutting some plain sheets of cartridge paper, the same size as I want to print, just to use as guidelines. I'll mark these up with some pencil lines, and then it'll help me to position all my transparent layers on top. Just using a little bit of masking tape to keep everything in line. And I've cut maybe about half a dozen sheets of transparent paper. And I'm going to draw on them with different types of pens and make different types of marks. My plan with these prints is to make a whole series of prints that are all completely different. Every one of them will be unique, and they'll be built up of different elements. And it's those elements that I'm going to start drawing right now. Some of them will be more background areas, so I'm using marks to fill in whole areas of my paper. Other ones will be more detailed, more like features. And I'm using my recent watercolours that I've been doing and recent thinking about seeds as a starting point for lots of my drawings. Thinking about seeds is helping me to remember that even if you can't see the product of something happening above the ground, there's still plenty going on underneath. And thinking about seeds in terms of gardening and farming has also made me think about careful preparation and the value of it. The way that the soil is prepared for the seeds, and the way they're protected from the cold to start with, before they can be planted out when the weather's a little bit better. It's just a reminder that sometimes the conditions just aren't right for something, but it doesn't mean it's not going to happen, and it doesn't mean you should give up hope in it. It just means that you have to wait for the conditions to get better, but you can still do lots of nurturing and preparing while that's all happening. Having prepared a couple of detailed layers with these seed forms on, I want to do a variety of different backgrounds using different types of textures, sort of reminiscent of preparing the ground for the seeds to go in. So this one I'm doing with a fine liner pen, laying down rows and rows of stripes. And I want a couple of areas that are just solid colour. So for really solid colours, I can just create backgrounds by cutting out the squares or circles of paper. But I can also create some textured areas. And I've played before with using ink or graphite to create textures on the tracing paper. But the graphite, I like the look of it, but it was really messy. So I'm going to try with a coloured pencil instead. And I'm just going to colour in whole areas as black as I can with the coloured pencil, and see how much of the texture transfers onto the screen. So I keep going, preparing my layers, until I've got enough that are going to fill 4 screens. 2 layers on each screen, so 8 in total. I can do a little bit of tidying up. I can't rub out or erase any areas, but I can do a little bit of editing with a knife. So I just had an extra leaf that was poking out of my little circle. I decided to take that out, and I cut down the rest of my layers just close to the drawings. And having got all of my layers and separations ready, I can spend a little bit of time just thinking about how they might look. At the minute everything is black and white, but I'll want to kind of work with some colour. So I spent a little bit of time just layering up my transparencies, just trying to imagine what they might look like in different colourways, and how I can get variation within the series using all my different layers. I prepare my screens using a photosensitive emulsion, giving them a nice even coat, and then placing them in a dark cupboard to dry. When it comes time to expose my images, I place my layers that I've prepared onto a light box, place the screen over the top, and then weigh them down with something nice and heavy. Then I can turn my light box on and shine some light through them. The amount of time it takes depends on the emulsion you're using, the strength of your light box. There are lots of factors. Once the screens are exposed, they look exactly the same until you spray a little bit of water on them. And then where your layers were will all wash away, and you're left with the screen with the hardened emulsion and little gaps where your stencil is. If you hold the screen up to the window, you should be able to see the light shining through it, and then you know it's ready. I'll finish this process for all 4 screens and all 8 images. I'm using a printmaking paper, and I tear it down using a metal ruler. The paper comes with nice natural deckled edges, and I can mimic these by the torn edges of the paper. From these big sheets I can get enough for 4 of these medium-sized screen prints that I'm making, with a little bit left over that I can put to one side and use for some mini prints later on. I make a nice big stack of papers. I've got 20 in all. Let's see how many prints I can make from 20 papers. Once my screens are ready, it's then time to prepare some ink. And I bought a selection of different colours that I think I'm going to use for this series. And I'm going to add some metallics as well. So I'm going to start with some silver mixed with a tiny little bit of gold. It gives a lovely champagne colour. I'm mixing that with some screen print medium. That'll make sure that it stays open so it doesn't dry on the screen. And I just spend a little bit of time testing out colours, adjusting them, and creating a sheet of a kind of a colour palette for this series of prints. I didn't end up using all of them, but most of them made it in there. And now it's time to start printing. Using bits of masking tape and bits of acetate, I can make sure that my paper is lined up nicely. Make sure the borders around the print are going to be equal, because they're going to be really obvious if they're not. And then I can start printing the backgrounds for my prints, which are just simple squares. And I start by printing half of them in that kind of pearly champagne colour and half of them in a dark blue. I print some of those textured areas that I did with the coloured pencil to see what they would look like, and I'm really quite happy with how they came out. You might notice on the dark blue ones there's a little pale dot on the same place in all of them, and I discovered later that this is a tiny little drop of ink that had kind of stuck itself to the board that I'd printed them on. So once I'd removed that, it was fine. But this is the first layer of many, so that I'm going to be overprinting that area on all of the prints, so I'm not too worried about that. Once I've got all the backgrounds done, then it's time to start playing with colour. I've played with different blues and greens and neutrals. I contemplated adding some yellow as well, but I decided that I would go with gold instead of yellow. So most of my prints are going to have some gold leaf or some gold ink on them. I printed these over the course of a couple of weeks, doing a few at a time. And sometimes you have a morning that just doesn't work out for you. And when I was printing this pale blue, that was one of those. I kept getting ink everywhere. It kept drying on the screen because it was really warm, and I was getting direct sunlight onto the screen. So I was getting patchy areas when I was printing. I managed to make most of my mistakes on scrap paper, but there was at least one print where I messed it up. I'll show you that at the end. For gold leaf, you need to do something a little bit different. And so I've got some acrylic size here that I'm mixing with some screen printing ink in a bright colour. I usually use a red or an orange, or in this case a magenta. Now, I worked out my recipe by trial and error, so I can't give you an exact measurements. I'd recommend that you do some experimenting of your own. I do use a mix of acrylic size, screen printing paste and acrylic paint. The timings with this are quite critical, and sometimes it doesn't work at all. It can be a little temperamental, but when I get it right, the effects are really worth it. Once you've got it mixed up, printing with this is just the same as printing with any other screen printing ink. I do like to do a few layers because it hasn't got much pigment in it, so a couple of layers will let me see where I'm printing. And I use the same registration sheet that I used for drawing the transparencies to line up my prints. Having done the backgrounds, I need to be able to make sure that my circle is perfectly centered. And so I use the same piece of paper that I did just to line up the paper that I'm printing on and the circle that I'm going to print. when I'm finished printing, I can scrape up any excess, store it in an airtight container, and I can reuse it again. The screens get thoroughly washed. Make sure there's no ink or inky residue left on them at all. And then the gold leaf can be applied. That pink circle is going to completely disappear underneath the gold leaf. And I just use a little bit of pressure before moving on to a very, very light brush, and then a more heavy one as the circle gets more well defined. I've got all of my background areas printed now with 2 or 3 layers on each one, and so it's time to add the detail layers, maybe some more of that texture, and just to see how I can make them all different. So I begin printing my detail layers. Some of them I'm printing over the top of gold, some of them I'm printing over the top of the kind of the more textured layers that I've put down. I decided to try printing some more areas of gold leaf this time with a little bit more detail. Sometimes this works. On this occasion, it didn't. When I placed the gold leaf on the inked areas, it stuck too well. It stuck in all in between areas, and I couldn't get any definition. Some of them I was able to rescue, but at least one I had to give up on. So instead I decided to mix up some gold ink with some gold paint and some screen printing paste. I only mix up a tiny little bit of this because it doesn't keep, it goes hard. So you need to just mix up what you can use on the day. And I'm going to print this with the little grid of dots, and that's a kind of a final touch on some of my more simple prints. I think the gold will work really nicely on those, just to add a little bit of a highlight. So all of this printing took place over a couple of weeks, but once I'd finished I ended up with 17 prints that I'm really happy with, and I'll show you those now. So here are my completed prints, and every single one of them is different, and I really like that. I wanted to experiment with that idea of creating a series of prints that all work together, and they've been kind of created from the same elements but used in different ways. So like these 2 prints look very different. They've got the same background, they've got the same kind of textural element there, they've got the circles that are the same size, but they've used gold in different ways. So this is gold ink and this is the gold leaf. And then there are quite a lot that have got this dark blue background as well. So these are really dark. It's dark blues and dark greens on that one. This one is the same dark blues and dark greens, but there is some gold leaf on there as well. And then I've overprinted that with that kind of seedy pattern again. I really like this kind of grid of spots that I've put in here. I'm just going to go through them. So you can see that this one and that one are very similar. So they've got the same, it's just the background is different. So this one's got the dark blue background and this one's got the champagne-y colour. And it just gives them a very different look, but I think they could look really good as a pair. And then this one has just that pale green texture over the gold leaf. Another quite dark one, but this one's got the gold on it. And then I did a couple of really simple ones with just the champagne, the gold, and then the seed kind of pattern. And I've got one of these, and I've got one, where's the other one? There. There we go. With just a slightly different seeded pattern, and I thought they could hang quite nicely as a pair as well. I've got a couple of other ones here that I thought would make nice pairs. So this one is the dark blue and this one's the champagne, again with that like subtle gold ink and the dotted pattern. A predominantly green one with dark blue on it. And then another slightly, this one's very similar to the other one that I've got there, but I just put the texture layer in the background and it sort of grounds it a bit and it gives it a different element. And then that one's the same but in blue. And then a really soft and subtle one just in that champagne and the pale green. So let me show you my seconds. So this one didn't make it any further than this kind of layer with the two colours on it with the background and then this textured layer, because I got a blob of ink there onto the white background. And I really wanted to preserve the white border in all of them. So any that got blobs of ink or fingerprints or anything like that on are fails. Thankfully, this was the only one. This was just a bit of tape that came up during the process of squeegeeing back and forth, and the ink went underneath the tape and into an open area of the screen. This one was going really well until the final layer, which was this dark blue, and I got a drop of water fell onto the screen just there because I had rushed the drying process of the squeegee. There was a little bit of water stuck in the handle. It ran down, dropped onto my print there and left a light streak. I don't know if you can see that, but yeah, there's a light streak down there on that whole layer. And I felt like it just wasn't, it's not bad, but it's obvious. So that's a second. And then this one was one of the ones that I applied gold leaf to, and then it just wouldn't come off the background. In order to try and rescue it, I overprinted it with the dark blue, but I do feel like there's bits of the gold leaf stuck in other areas that if it was just this bit here, I could cope with that because that looks sort of intentional, but there are random bits, quite hard to see on the camera, that got stuck into the darker areas, and I just felt like that just didn't work very well. So I'm calling this one a second as well, although it's a sort of happy second in that I might use it myself. I might like put it up on the wall here to display. And in fact, I might use that one as well, like that, just to kind of keep for my own amusement. So I started with 20 sheets of paper, so I've got 3 seconds, so I should have 17 perfect prints here ready to go. So all I'm going to do now is sign and number them, and then photograph to list them. Now I'm ready to photograph these, so I'll be listing them on my website. They should go live this weekend, and I'll be sending an email out to my mailing list first, who will get first dibs and early bird pricing. And then they'll be available for general sale in about a week's time. So thanks very much for watching today and helping me get back into the printmaking groove. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Okay, take care, bye-bye.